The record of Elias Gray, there are names history forgets, because remembering them would mean admitting what was done. Elias Gray was one such name. His story survived not in books or ledgers, but in whispers passed from mouth to mouth, long after the pine forests of Cumberland County stopped weeping their resin into the firelight. What little is known begins in 1834 on a plantation that no longer appears on maps, an expanse of tar-laden forest run by the Beringer family. Elias was born there, the son of a field hand and a housemaid, his earliest years shaped by the rhythm of axes, iron pots, and the scent of burning sap. The men said he had a quietness that unsettled overseers, the way he watched rather than spoke. The Beringers' operation grew vast by 1,850, spreading across miles of pine. They leased enslaved labor to nearby plantations and, like others in that trade, found profit not just in harvest but in human flesh. Beneath the veneer of legitimate industry was another commerce: children sold for debts, women for silence, men for obedience. By 1855, Elias had been transferred to the outer camps, where tar kilns burned day and night. There, among the pitch fires and fumes, he came to know suffering as a kind of constant weather. His wife, a woman named Ada, was sold south after a miscarriage. Their infant buried in unmarked soil near the workers' quarters. No record survives of Elias's reaction, but the overseer's journal for that year contains a single curious note. Gray has grown solemn, speaks to no one, works by night when others sleep. The ledger was signed by a man named Phineas Bering, eldest son of the owner, educated in Charleston, obsessed with efficiency and order. Phineas introduced new bookkeeping methods, new punishments for theft, and new ways of extracting tar faster than ever before. He kept lists of every worker, every injury, every ounce of yield. Those ledgers were found years later half burned in the ruins of a storage barn. On the final surviving page, under the date February 6th, 1856, the entries end abruptly. No reason given, no closing signature. But oral history among descendants in that region still speaks of a night when the sky turned the color of blood, of screams that blended with the roar of fire, of men running from their cabins with faces slicked in blackened resin. What caused that fire has never been confirmed. Some say lightning struck a kiln. Others whisper Elias Gray's name like a prayer and a warning. The man who repaid cruelty with flame. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The ledger beneath the ash by the spring of 1855, the Beringer plantation operated like a private kingdom buried in pine and smoke. Few outsiders ventured that deep into the Carolina backwoods, and those who did seldom asked questions. Tar and pitch shipments left the property under false names, bound for Wilmington, sometimes even Savannah. Everything the Beringers did was hidden beneath the veneer of industry, all business, all records, all silence. Elias Gray became indispensable during those years. He could read the weather from the resin's scent, could judge kiln temperature by the color of the smoke. Overseers relied on his precision. He was never whipped, rarely spoken to. They mistook his silence for submission. It was, in truth, calculation. The surviving letters of Phineas Beringer, discovered decades later in an attorney's archive, reveal a mind obsessed with order. He wrote often about inventory irregularities, about enslaved men who vanished between seasons, about discrepancies in shipments of barrels. His handwriting tightens on one page, a note scrawled in haste. If one of them is trading on the side, I'll find it. They forget that a system must be clean to endure. The system was not clean. It was rot disguised as precision. Rumors among the workers spoke of men buried near the resin pits, of women sent away under false debts, of supervisors who visited the quarters after dark. Elias knew the truth of these things. He had seen enough to understand that the Beringers' empire was built not only on tar, but on flesh and silence. Then, in late November, something began to shift. A young boy, Samuel, no more than 12, vanished from the quarters. The official word was that he had run off, but every worker knew that was impossible. The forests were death to anyone who didn't know their paths. The next week, another worker disappeared, then a third. No one spoke aloud of what was happening, but the air around the camp changed thicker, charged, waiting. Elias stopped sleeping in the quarters. He began working alone at night, tending the kilns long after others had gone. He told the overseer it calmed his nerves. In truth, he was studying, watching the way flame took to pine dust, how quickly pitch caught, how long before the wind carried sparks. When winter came, Phineas grew restless. His ledgers, those immaculate records, began to show losses he could not explain. Barrels missing, accounts unbalanced. He blamed theft. He blamed laziness. He blamed everything except the truth, that the balance he worshipped was already breaking. In January 1856, Elias was transferred again to the upper kiln near the main storage barn, where resin was boiled before shipment. It was the heart of the operation, surrounded by tar barrels stacked like dark, glistening coffins. Later testimony from neighboring workers recorded in 1889 by a state historian described Elias as a man hollowed by purpose. No anger, no words, only stillness and a gaze that seemed fixed on something no one else could see. They said he was waiting for a night when the wind would blow from the east. The fire sermon the night came on February 14th, 1856. Cold, dry air. The pines moved like an ocean of blackened needles, whispering their static through the dark. By then, the overseers had retreated to their cabins. The men in the quarters were silent, pretending to sleep. The only light came from the great resin kiln, the one Elias now tended alone. He had prepared for weeks, quietly, methodically. Every night, he'd shift one more barrel of pitch closer to the fire line, loosen one more latch, leave one more spark route open to the wind. He knew the patterns of the guards' patrols, the squeak of each wheel, the moment the watchman's cough broke the hour. When it began, it was not chaos, it was orchestration. According to the plantation records later recovered, the first explosion occurred at 11:27 p.m. Witnesses miles away saw the smoke rise like a pillar splitting the night. The tar pits went up next the resin, volatile and eager, ignited with a roar that sounded like the tearing of fabric. Within minutes, fire crawled across the yard, leaping from barrel to barrel, a chain of orange veins threading the property. The barn roof collapsed by midnight. The main house, built of cured pine, caught soon after. Inside, Phineas Beringer was last seen attempting to drag his ledgers into the hallway, armfuls of parchment clutched to his chest, shouting for someone to bring water. No one came. The heat took him before he reached the stairs. Elias was seen once, just once, standing near the resin vats, his face lit by the blue-white core of the fire. He didn't flee. He didn't scream. The wind had shifted east, just as he'd waited for. He watched the blaze move with it, taking the buildings, the fences, the pens. Then he stepped forward into the smoke. By dawn, the plantation was gone. Of the 83 enslaved people listed in the last inventory, 9 were missing. Some likely fled. Some were consumed by the fire. Some no one ever found. Only a few charred remains could be identified. Among them were Phineas Beringer and 2 overseers. Elias Gray was not among the dead. For years afterward, there were sightings, whispers of a tall man with burn scars crossing the Carolina line, working lumber mills, sleeping in the woods, vanishing before sunrise. The stories grew more uncertain with time. When the ruins were surveyed in 1008, 171, a government engineer uncovered a metal box beneath what had been the main house foundation. Inside were partially burned ledgers, still legible in parts. One entry was marked differently, not in Phineas's tight script, but in another hand, deliberate and clean. It read, "The system is cleansed, the balance holds, the ink had not burned." Historians debate whether the handwriting was Elias's. Some say it was planted later. Others say the ledgers themselves never existed, that the whole account was a reconstruction built from rumor and grief. But the map that accompanied the records shows something unusual, a precise circular clearing where the fire began, still free of trees after 20 years. Locals called it the Hollow Yard. Hunters said nothing grows there, not even moss. And when the wind comes from the east, the air still smells faintly of pitch. The Hollow Yard in 1892, a young surveyor named Thomas Weldon arrived in Bladen County to chart the remnants of what was once Beringer land. The property had long been abandoned, its boundaries devoured by pine and swamp, but government pressure demanded an official record. Locals refused to accompany him past the old creek, warning him of bad ground and echo smoke. Weldon dismissed them as superstitious and went on alone. He camped near the center of what maps still labeled Tarfield Plantation. It was quiet there, unnaturally so, no birds at dawn, no frogs by the waterline. The soil, he noted, was blackened even 3 feet below the surface. Charcoal veins still breathe. He wrote in his notebook, "As if the ground has lungs." That night the wind changed. Weldon recorded the sound first, a low hum, not quite like fire, not quite like breath. Then the smell, pine, pitch, and iron. He claimed it grew stronger the longer he stayed still. When he approached the circular clearing, the hollow yard, his horse refused to enter. The soil there was smooth as glass, no roots, no stones, only a faint shimmer, as if the earth were varnished. Among the few artifacts he recovered was a length of iron chain fused into a lump of resin. Embedded within was what appeared to be a fragment of bone. Weldon sent it to Raleigh for analysis, but no record of it survives. He wrote once more to his superiors, describing his final night on the property. The east wind began again near midnight. The pitch scent was unbearable, and in that smell I thought I saw movement, flame shapes without light, figures walking where the fire once ran, not ghosts, not smoke, just absence. Like holes in the air where heat should be. I believe something was bound here, and that the fire did not free it, only sealed it inside. He left the next morning. His field journal ended with one final line, scratched hastily in pencil, "The balance hold." After Weldon's disappearance in 193, his wagon found overturned by the creek, his maps soaked but intact. The area was declared unsurveyable. The state redrew the county lines, leaving that stretch unmarked. By the early 1900s, no one spoke the Beringer name aloud. In 1921, a lumber company attempted to clear the forest. Workers reported tar bubbling from the ground in summer heat, igniting spontaneously when the wind shifted east. 3 men burned to death within an hour. The company abandoned the contract. The report filed that year included a warning stamped in red ink: site unfit for habitation or industry, combustive soil anomaly unresolved. Today, no structures stand on that ground. Locals still call it the Hollow Yard. Children say if you dig after dark, you'll hear something tapping from beneath, the sound of someone counting, marking ledger lines in the dirt. And when the east wind rises, people claim they smell the pitch again. They say you can see a tall, silent man walking through the trees, his skin pale as ash, his hands black with resin, carrying an invisible ledger that still burns in his grasp. When asked what they think he's looking for, most won't answer. The few who do say he's making sure the balance still holds. The ash cartographer in 1895, the state's Geological and Agricultural Board sent a junior researcher named Dr. Edwin Mott to Bladen County to re-examine the soil anomalies at the former Beringer site. His letters survive in fragments, thin pages browned at the edges, found decades later in the archive of the University of North Carolina. Mott's assignment was bureaucratic: collect soil samples, document ash density, note trace minerals. He arrived skeptical. His early notes dismiss local superstition entirely. I do not subscribe to the folklore of hauntings or eternal fire. These people conflate natural combustion with memory. The land remembers nothing, yet within a week his tone changed. He noted that the hollow yard remained unnaturally clear despite no known burns since 1856, no plant growth, no moss, not even under the rocks. Beneath the topsoil he found a layer of hardened pitch 2 inches thick, black, glassy, faintly warm to the touch. He described it as a varnish of carbon fused to something unyielding, like enamel over bone. Mott reported a rhythmic vibration beneath the clearing at dawn, so faint it could only be felt through the soles of his boots. His assistant, a freedman named Isaac Delro, refused to stay overnight after hearing what he described as a hammering from under the roots. On February 18th, Mott wrote his last full entry. I cannot explain the resonance. The earth does not echo wind, nor animal, nor water. It beats steady, deliberate, as though a weight were being shifted below. 3 days later, his camp was found abandoned. His instruments stood upright, unbroken, as if set carefully in place. His journal was buried beneath the tent flooring, sealed in a tin lunch box. His body was never recovered. The board declared it an accident, perhaps quicks, or a sinkhole. But Delro's later statement, recorded in 1903, contradicted this. He said he'd returned once to the clearing after the disappearance and found the ground marked with small circular impressions, like the tips of fingers pressed into resin. He refused to go back. By 1897, the Beringer Tract was officially removed from the State Survey grid. The hollow yard was labeled on internal maps only as unstable strata. No further investigations were authorized. Yet in 1901, the same pattern of tremors Mott described was felt 20 miles east near the river basin where tar shipments once traveled. Witnesses spoke of a faint hum like a kiln draft catching flame again, and just before dawn the air smelled of pine pitch. The resin archive by 1903, the Beringer land had become a study in bureaucratic denial. Files marked Tarfield Survey were quietly moved to the Department of Agriculture's basement annex in Raleigh, mislabeled as forestry experiments. Only one clerk, Eleanor Shaw, continued to reference them openly. Her preserved correspondence with the board shows a woman both meticulous and quietly defiant. She wrote, "You can bury the papers, but the pattern repeats. The hollow yard is not an isolated fault. It is a wound in the soil." Shaw had never visited the site, yet she seemed obsessed with its records, particularly the notes of Dr. Mott, the missing geologist. In a memorandum dated November 7, 1903, she compared the resin samples he collected with tree cores from across the state. Her conclusion, traces of the same fused tar compound appeared up to 40 miles from the original site. She believed the material was migrating. In 1904, Shaw requested access to state geological specimens kept in sealed jars. When she opened one from the Beringer region, witnesses reported that the pitch inside had softened. After nearly 50 years, it released a sharp, metallic scent like scorched pine mixed with iron. The clerk assisting her fainted. Shaw wrote in her report that the sample appeared to pulse and described a single bubble expanding as if exhaling. The specimen was destroyed the next morning. Her supervisor cited contamination. In her final report, December 19, 1904, Shaw warned that the Beringer event was not a combustion, but a preservation, that what the fire sought to erase was instead fixed in resin, bound under pressure. Her language turned increasingly personal toward the end. If Mott's accounts are true, something beneath that soil was meant to be contained, not burned away. The ledgers spoke of balance. Perhaps this was the only way the land could hold it. 2 days later, Shaw vanished en route to deliver her findings to the board's chairman. Her carriage was found near the edge of Bladen County. No struggle, no papers, only a faint stain on the wood paneling, later confirmed to be pine pitch. Her disappearance prompted a quiet internal inquiry. No further mention of the hollow yard appears in state archives after 1905. Yet in 1911, a logging crew working 70 miles north reported cutting into a tree whose rings contained blackened resin identical to the old Beringer pitch. When split open, the center exuded a smell of tar and smoke, and at its core, a sliver of metal engraved with a single word, balance. The discovery was never published. The logging company closed within months after multiple workers fell ill with strange fevers described as soot chills. Local doctors called it pneumonia. One foreman wrote to his wife before dying, "The trees hum at night. The wind comes from the east." The letter was postmarked from a town that no longer exists. The man who collected fire by 1922, the story of the hollow yard, had become a ghost tale whispered among lumbermen and railway workers. But for Professor Alton Varick, a chemical historian from Chapel Hill, it was no myth, it was a pattern. Varick had come across fragments of Eleanor Shaw's missing correspondence while cataloging state archives. Her notes about preserved combustion and migrating pitch fascinated him. In his 1923 monograph Industrial Catastrophes of the Antebellum South, he argued that the Lazarus fire, though he never used that name, was a failed alchemical correction, a natural response to human extraction. But Varick's fascination soon crossed into obsession. He began collecting samples from every known site where longleaf pines had once been tapped for turpentine. His students described him arriving at lectures with glass vials of resin sealed with wax, labeling each one with cryptic titles like Debt Paid, Ash Ledger, and Dinina's Grove. In his private journals now preserved in the Southern Historical Collection, Varick wrote of a second combustion that could be felt rather than seen, a low hum in the timber that thickens toward dusk. He claimed the air near certain pines grew electrically charged, as if the forest were storing a storm it could not release. In March 1925, Varick visited Cumberland County, the original site of the 1008-156 fire. The locals warned him not to dig where the tar pit breathes. He ignored them. 3 days later, a railway worker found his campsite abandoned. Varick's tent was intact, his journal still open beside a blackened hole in the ground roughly the size of a man's torso. Inside it, the soil had hardened into glass. The last page of his journal read, "The trees remember, the pitch is memory made solid. When it melts, history speaks." Weeks later, a crate arrived at the university labeled for archives from Varick. It contained 7 sealed glass bottles, each filled with dark amber resin. The registrar noted that the jars emitted faint warmth and smelled of burnt sugar and metal. Within days, 3 archivists fell ill with tar fever, the same sickness that had killed the loggers a decade earlier. The university sealed the bottles in a sub-basement storage vault, where they remain catalogued under hazardous material, unexamined specimens 1-7, but the legend didn't end there. In 1931, a farmer near Fayetteville reported finding a buried box in a collapsed root system after a storm. Inside were scraps of old, heat-warped paper burned ledger fragments. Among them was a name repeated several times in faded ink, Lazarus Pharaoh. The discovery was quietly dismissed as coincidence, a clerical name, not a man. Yet the script matched that of plantation ledgers dated 1008, 154-1856, no official record of a Lazarus exists in any registry of enslaved workers from that region. Still, in Varick's own handwriting, scrawled in the margins of his early research, there's one chilling annotation beside the name. He found her. The land never forgot him. The Charleston Interview, 1942. In the spring of 1942, the Charleston Gazette published a modest human interest feature titled Voices of the Last Generation. The article profiled elderly freedpeople who had lived through the Civil War and Reconstruction. One brief column mentioned Miss Dinina R., aged near 100, living with her great-granddaughter on the old Rutledge lands. The journalist, Howard Elgin, was a graduate student turned war correspondent. His notes, preserved in his private papers, reveal that his meeting with Dinina was not intended to be remarkable. He'd been assigned to gather oral histories before they were lost forever. But his tone changes abruptly halfway through his field diary from detached academic curiosity to unease bordering on reverence. Her eyes, he wrote, were not the eyes of a century-old woman. They were clear, unshaken, fixed as if looking at something still burning beyond my comprehension. Elgin recorded that Dinina spoke slowly, her accent softened by time, but her memory sharp. She recalled the rice fields, the overseers, the night songs sung under watchfires. Then she mentioned a man not by name, but with quiet certainty. "He came for me," she said, "walked through fire and pine and blood to find me. The night he left, the wind changed, been different ever since." Elgin, thinking she referred to a lost husband, asked if she ever learned what happened to him. Dinina smiled faintly and shook her head. "I don't need to learn what I already feel. You don't need to see light to know it burns." She refused to give his name, saying, "It ain't safe in writing. Some names still catch." Elgin, though skeptical, asked what she meant. She lifted her trembling hand and pointed toward the window overlooking the rice marshes, a dark shimmer in the late afternoon haze. "They cut down the old pines years ago," she whispered, "said the tar was bad luck. But when the ground's wet, it still smells like him." The tape recorder he used captured a faint distortion at that moment, a warbling hum like the sound of distant cicadas layered over a low crackling. He noted it as equipment interference. But when the recording was played back in the newsroom, several staff members swore they heard something beneath her words, a second voice, low and measured, whispering through the static. The only discernible phrase was "paid in full." The original audio reel was sent to Columbia University for restoration, but was lost in transit. Only Elgin's transcript survives, and even that ends abruptly with his last handwritten line, "The resin still bleeds through the earth. It finds the ones who listen." Elgin left Charleston soon after and enlisted in the U.S. Army as a field archivist in Italy. He never returned. When his belongings were shipped home in 1945, among them was a small glass, sealed vial containing hardened black pitch labeled in his careful handwriting, "Charleston, 1942, Dinina." No record exists of how he acquired it. The War Department files 1953 by 1953. The U.S. Army Chemical Corps had quietly expanded its collection of legacy anomalies A samples from industrial sites, defunct laboratories, and unexplained accidents dating as far back as the 19th century. Among the unmarked glass vials catalogued under Archive Set B-72 was one that drew unusual attention from researchers at Fort Detrick. The label, written in faded fountain pen, read, "Charleston, 1942, Dinina, Dr." Robert H. Merrow, a biochemist recently reassigned from Oak Ridge, noted that the substance appeared to be solidified tar, dark brown to black, faintly iridescent under lamplight. Its container had been sealed with wax and copper wire, as though to prevent tampering rather than preserve sterility. The sample emitted a peculiar scent, burnt pine and metal, identical to that described in Eleanor Shaw's 1904 notes. Merrow's initial analysis classified it as hydrocarbon matrix contaminated by organic residue. Yet, when subjected to mild heat, the resin exuded vapor with anomalous properties. The fumes condensed into droplets that did not evaporate and that, under magnification, seemed to move. In his confidential report dated July 12, 1953, Merrow wrote, "Upon heating to 80 degrees C, the specimen exhibited self-restoring structure, fractures in the material sealed within seconds, accompanied by faint emission of light, no external reagent detected, composition unstable but appears alive in the strictest chemical sense capable of metabolic mimicry." He proposed the term ricinus autokinesis. A week later, the lab assistant assigned to Merrow, Private E. Lang, was hospitalized for respiratory distress after inhaling vapors during a second test. His last coherent statement, recorded by medical personnel, was, "It smells like smoke from wet wood, but there's whispering in it, like people talking underwater." Lang died within 48 hours. No autopsy was released. Following the incident, Merrow was ordered to cease experimentation, but according to internal memoranda later declassified in 1998, he continued his study after hours, noting in his personal log that the substance responded to human presence. "It darkens when observed," he wrote, "and under certain frequencies, especially low oscillations, the surface trembles, forming impressions that resemble script. Photographs attached to the log, now missing, allegedly showed faint indentations spelling words." The last decipherable entry before the log's abrupt end reads, "The resin names itself balance." Same inscription found in Bladen County, 1911, cannot be coincidence, must determine source possibly pre-war industrial contamination or something older. Merrow disappeared 3 days later. His office was sealed, and B-72 was reassigned to a cold storage annex in Maryland under the classification Non-Biological Potential Containment Hazard. In 1961, a structural failure in that annex caused several vials to rupture. The report mentions one container releasing an odor described as pine smoke and tar. The cleanup team noted that the spill absorbed into concrete, leaving a permanent stain in the shape of a hand. The vial labeled Charleston 1942 Denina was never recovered. The residue and the record present day in 2024, an intern named Miles Rennick at the South Carolina Department of Environmental Archives began digitizing a box of mislabeled microfilm reels from the 1950s. The box, stamped Dear Esens/Forestry Division, contained decaying cellulose film and one glass fragment sealed in plastic. The accession form reads simply, "Recovered from Cold Storage Annex, Maryland, 1961 incident. Handle with gloves." Rennick, unaware of the object's history, logged the fragment into inventory, noting its faint amber discoloration and warped edges. Later that night, while scanning the reels, he noticed several frames that shouldn't have existed, photographs interspersed between typewritten pages, showing what appeared to be pine trees burning under a moonlit sky. One frame displayed a blurred human figure standing before a mound of smoldering soil. Another showed a close-up of handwriting carved into resin, balance. He assumed it was an archival mix-up. That assumption changed 3 days later when a faint scent began emanating from the storage room, not of mildew or dust, but of tar and smoke, sharp and metallic, the exact odor described in the century-old forestry reports. Rennick logged the occurrence and continued scanning. On the fourth reel, the film emitted a static hum through the digitizer's speaker, an impossibility for silent microfilm. The waveform analysis displayed rhythmic pulses at regular intervals, faint but patterned. When slowed and filtered, the noise resolved into something disturbingly articulate, a woman's voice, raspy, aged, whispering the same phrase repeatedly, "You live free, and that means I'm free too." The file was flagged as corrupted. But two colleagues who reviewed it the next day claimed they could hear two voices, not one the second low and measured, saying, "Paid in full." By week's end, the entire storage corridor had been sealed after several staff complained of dizziness, chest tightness, and the persistent scent of burning wood. Environmental sensors detected no smoke. Yet the metal shelving nearest the microfilm box had developed a faint, oily sheen, amber black, tacky to the touch. The department quietly transferred the materials to a federal containment facility near Huntsville. Officially, the cause was chemical degradation of cellulose nitrate film. Unofficially, two technicians refused to handle the box, claiming the residue left hand-shaped imprints that bled through gloves. The file was renamed Beringer Material 1008, 156, 1961, 2024. In an unsigned memorandum found appended to the case summary, someone wrote in pencil, "The pitch remembers. Every time it burns, it learns the shape of those who light it. It waits for the next hand. The entry ends there." As of this year, no public record confirms what became of the Huntsville sample, but satellite data from early September show localized heat signatures in the pine reserves east of Bladen County, an area officially uninhabited since 1907. The Forestry Department attributes it to a brush fire caused by lightning. Locals, however, have begun reporting a stronger scent on humid nights, tar, iron, and smoke drifting from the direction of the old forest. Hunters claim the trees hum before dawn, and when the wind comes from the east, people say it carries voices, soft, distant, whispering the same two words, balance kept.